for those of you who are parents, thank you for being here tonight. Those of you who act as parents, thank you for being here tonight. Those of you who are educators, thank you for being here tonight. Hopefully I bring information that you will find helpful. So just to start off with, I always like to get a sense of what's going on in the room. So how many of you have had a stressful event of any kind in the last week and a half? Okay, some of you need to go home. You don't need to be here. If you haven't had a stressful event, imagine what a stressful event might be like. So when you had that stressful event, how many of you lost your cool in some form or fashion? Okay, so those of you who don't lose your cool, you can also go home. You don't need to be here either. I think we've all had the experience of being stressed, of being distressed, and looking back on that and thinking, I wish I had handled that very differently. And we've probably all had the opportunity to see children have that same experience, where they lost their cool because it was more than they could manage to hold it together, and then later they are really sorry about it. This week, I have two kids. I have a 10-year-old and I have an 8-year-old. And my 10-year-old has hit the age where he is really good at being critical. Critical of mom, critical of dad, critical of teachers. And sometimes he gets himself worked up. And when he gets really worked up, he will say things that he really shouldn't say. And I'll say to him later, you know, that was rude. And he'll say, I know. And what do you think you need to do about it? I need to make better choices. And when do you need to make those better choices? Before I say anything. We probably all fail at this sometimes. But when you're 6, or you're 4, or you're 10, or you're 17, or you're 23, or even maybe 27, that doesn't always go the way you'd like it to. So, what I'd like you to take away from this evening. First of all, I'd like to tell you a little bit about what mindfulness is, because there's a lot of misinformation out there in the community, not just our community, but all communities, about what mindfulness is and what mindfulness isn't. I also want to talk a little bit about what self-regulation is and when we should expect people to develop some of those capabilities. The take-home message on that is going to be, it's much later than you think. And I want to practice with you a little bit. And when you talk to people who are interested in mindfulness, we use this word practice over and over again. And the reason we use the word practice over and over again is because we recognize that that particular time where we sat and we tried to check in with what was going on and we paid attention to our breath, it's just practice. And some days go better and some days go worse, but you're going to get another chance at it because it's practice. Like learning to play the piano, or learning to write in cursive, or learning to say nice things to your mom even when you're mad at her. You're going to get lots of practice at it. Okay, so we're going to start off with a little bit of practice. And first I want to teach you a little bit about how we do this and what you're going to do, and then we're actually going to do it. So first of all, your mind is going to wander. I'm going to ask you to do some things, and your mind's going to wander off, and you're going to think about the laundry you need to do, or the groceries you need to buy, or the medication you forgot to pick up, or you need to get your oil changed. Gosh, it's cold outside. Squirrels, squirrels, squirrels. That's okay. Every time it happens, just say to yourself, that's okay. My mind is doing what it's supposed to do, and I am going to just gently bring it back. Imagine your mind being like a toddler. Toddlers drive us nuts, but we know they can't help it most of the time. So we take them by the hand and we get them back to what we're doing. So think about your mind being like a toddler. So when we do meditation practice, the kind of meditation I teach is called mindfulness. There are other kinds of practices. They're very different. Mindfulness is, I think, easier, but it's what I know. So the first thing I want you to do is, if you have something in your hands, put it on the floor. You don't need it for right now. The next thing I want you to do is, if you are not height challenged like I am, I want you to try and get both feet down on the floor. And if you have to slide forward in your chair a little bit to get your feet flat on the floor, like I have to slide forward in my chair to get my feet flat on the floor, do that. And I want you to try and put your foot all the way down on the floor so you can feel your toes and your heel of your foot on the floor. I know, you're wearing boots because it's yucky outside. But I want you to really be aware of how your foot feels on the floor. And I want you to put your hands in your lap in whatever way that feels comfortable. So, maybe you want to hold on to them because, like me, you have cold hands. Or maybe you just want to lay them together. Or you want to just lay them on your lap. Just however your hands are comfortable. They don't need to be fancy. And I want you to imagine your head being pulled just gently upright. Just pulled up to the ceiling with a nice silk cord. It's not pulling you with any kind of pain or difficulty, but just lifting upright. And we're doing this for two reasons. Number one, we're telling your mind, guess what? We're going to do something different because no one sits like this, except the Queen of England. She sits like this. We're telling your mind you're doing something different, but I'm a developmental neuropsychologist. We're also prefrontal cortex motivated here. We want to get more oxygen into that tissue right behind your forehead. And the best way for your circulating system in your brain to get the blood flow there is to lift your head upright. And I could give you all kinds of fancy words about the circle of Willis, and that would be good for my grad student who's in the audience. But all I want you to do is just make your brain a little bit better oxygenated. Now, if you're comfortable, I'm going to ask you to shut your eyes. And if that is not comfortable for whatever reason, just find a spot on the chair in front of you or on the floor and softly focus on that. And I want you to take a nice big breath in. And then let that breath go. And I want you to take another nice big breath in. And you're letting that one go. And now I'm going to have you do some square breathing with me. So you're going to breathe in slowly, counting to 4. And when you get to 4, I want you to hang on to that breath. Don't let it go yet. Counting to 4 again. And then when you get to 4, I want you to count to 4 again and let that breath go. And when you get to 4 again, now I want you to not breathe in, not breathe out. Just notice that space between in and out. And then when you're ready, breathe in again. So breathing in, 1, 2, 3, 4. Holding, 1, 2, 3, 4. Letting it go, 1, 2, 3, 4. And now holding, no breath, 1, 2, 3, 4. And now at whatever pace you breathe, just keep breathing the square. Breathing 4, holding 4, breathing out 4, holding for 4. I'm just going to do that, and I'm going to let you know with a bell when you're done. And if your mind starts to wander, that's all right. Just bring it back. It's a toddler. Coming back to the room, opening your eyes. Maybe you need to wiggle your fingers and toes a little bit. Now, if I were teaching you in a smaller group, I'd have you answer a question then. I would ask you, what did you notice? So what did you notice? This you can answer for yourself inside your own head. What did you notice? Maybe you noticed that your mind is really busy. Lots of things going on. Or maybe you noticed you were really uncomfortable, or maybe you noticed that your belly hurts, or your back is stiff, or your neck has a crick in it, or there's something going on. Just noticing that is the beginning of mindfulness, is being aware that things are different in there each time we practice. So in terms of contemplative practices, I'm noticing that those letters are really, really tiny. So I'm going to digest the tree for you. So where does mindfulness or mindfulness practice come from? Where do they come from? Well, they come from this huge contemplative tradition that we actually find across all religious traditions. So whether you come from the Jewish tradition or a Christian tradition, whether you come from a more Protestant tradition, Catholic tradition, whether you come from a Muslim tradition, or maybe you come from no tradition, all practices of thinking about the world and our place in the world have a point for connecting, have a point for quiet or silence or thinking. So looking at that tree, some of the things up there. So up there is work and volunteering and vigils and marches. We've had a lot of those in the last year and another one coming this weekend. There might be things like deep listening and storytelling, walking meditation and qigong and aikido and yoga. And as you go around, you think, gosh, there are a lot of pieces of different traditions. And one big one is stillness. And not all mindfulness practices are still. So I've just had you do a still practice, and I'm going to give you two more slightly still practices to do tonight. But there are some bigger movement practices. So when I teach kids with ADHD, so you can imagine what it's like to work with kids who are more impulsive than the typical kid, more hyperactive than the typical kid, have a harder time paying attention than the typical kid. They learn to meditate with me. And I spend a lot of time on short seated practices and longer movement-based practices. So all part of the contemplative tradition. Sometimes we think mindfulness is something other than it is. So rather than me telling you all the different things I think about with mindfulness, I wanted to bring the words of some noted scholars, experts, and teachers. Amy Saltzman is a physician who also teaches mindfulness to kids in the Los Angeles area. She describes mindfulness as meeting our thoughts and feelings, just as they are, not trying to control them or change them in any way. And there are lots of times we have feelings that we think, I don't like the way that feels, or I don't want to feel that way, or I shouldn't feel that way. And that causes agitation, not the feeling, but the it shouldn't be that way sense about things. With mindfulness, we really work on being with the feelings as they are. So rather than suffering because we're trying to push stuff away and control it, just sitting with it. Sometimes the sitting with it is easier than the pushing it and packing it away. Jon Kabat-Zinn, who really founded the mindfulness movement in North America, he was a microbiologist or a molecular biologist. I can never remember which one he was, but he was a faculty member at the University of Massachusetts. And he left his very cushy faculty position because he decided he wanted to bring his Buddhist practices of meditation into treating people with chronic pain disorders. And he developed mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is now used with just about every population, whether you are a menopausal woman, or you are someone with cancer, or you're a kid with ADHD, or you just want to get in touch with your inner life. Mindfulness-based stress reduction has touched a population that is somewhat like you. So Jon Kabat-Zinn's understanding of mindfulness is paying attention to the present moment and having intention about that. So really focusing on what is happening right now with me right here in this room, not worrying about what's happening next door or across town or 2 days ago or tomorrow, and letting go of that judgment. And he always tacks on this extra line, as if your life depended on it. And if he were here, he would go on to say, actually, your life does depend on it. Because all those times you're wishing things were different or focusing on trying to control your distress or making yourself feel better, you're actually wasting minutes of your life. You might be interested in James Baraz's work. And his whole point in his statement about mindfulness is that you are aware of what's happening right now without wishing it were different. I think we all have these experiences. So last year, it was more like 14, 15 months ago, I knew my dad was having a cancer biopsy. He had a screening came back really bad, and he is a physician. He told me he probably had cancer. I knew he was having his biopsy. I knew the timing of when the results should come in, and he called and said, I want to talk to you and your brother at the same time. Can you be home at about 8:30? Okay, that's bad. We all know that's bad. When somebody says, I want to talk to you about something, I want to talk to you at the same time as your sibling, and he's just had a cancer biopsy, you know what he's going to say. So, in fact, he did call me and tell me that. But I had about 2 hours to wait until I could have that conversation. And so for the next 2 hours, my husband and children can tell you I walked around the house saying the same thing over and over. What it is already there. No matter what it is. No matter where that cancer is, no matter how bad it is already there. And then I'd take a big breath. And then I'd say it again. And I'd take another big breath. And it turned out that he got treatment, and we think he's probably okay. And he goes for his screenings every 3 months. But right now, he is very medically stable, and his doctor thinks he's probably cured. We won't know that for 5 years. That suffering that night, what it is, it's already here, could have been so much worse had I been saying to myself, I wish he didn't have cancer, I wish he didn't have cancer, because the wishing wasn't going to change what was going to happen. As magical as I think I am in the world, I'm not magical enough to control my father's cancer. Actually, I know I'm not magical enough to control a lot of things, but I tell myself I am. And I think it's okay to sometimes think you're magical. I also want to be clear about what this school board teaches about mindfulness, because there are always concerns when mindfulness comes up that there's a possibility that we are trying to bring religion, particularly Buddhism, to a setting that is not particularly religious. So I'll tell you up front, I'm not a Buddhist, not even a closet Buddhist, haven't had any training in Buddhism, not trying to convert anyone. Neither is the public board. And I think this is a really important point. So there are 3 pieces to what the public board says about mindfulness. And that's been brought into some classrooms, and some teachers and staff and administrators have had some extra training. But the first thing is, this is a practice we learn first. We practice first. We become more mindful first. And then we teach it to other people. And the Greater Essex County School Board is not any different than gold standard practice of mindfulness. This is actually true across the mindfulness research and intervention community. We pretty much all believe you learn first. You're on your cushion first, and then you teach someone else. And you'll hear that come up again. The second thing the school board teaches about mindfulness is it's a way to manage one's own thoughts and feelings and behaviors. And it's not a religious practice, but notice it's about managing one's own thoughts and feelings and behaviors. So the practices are designed to support the individual in doing something within themselves, not change them, control them, make them different, just manage them. And then last but not least, it's a brain-focused activity. And this is the part as a neuropsychologist that's pretty exciting to me, because we have more and more mounting evidence that regular meditation, regular mindfulness practice actually changes the way the brain works. And even more exciting, it changes the structures in the brain. So it increases the connections in the prefrontal cortex, that space right behind your forehead that makes you a fully grown and high-functioning human being. It increases the connections in that part of the brain to other areas. And it actually reduces the volume. It shrinks the amygdala, which is a part of your brain that my dog has and my lizard has. I don't have him anymore. He died a long time ago, but I still think of him in the present. The amygdala is a part of the brain that's really associated with fear and aggression. The fight or flight, the I gotta eat or be eaten. Well, how great is this? We have a practice that changes the way the brain works, and it changes the size of some structures. Doing something that's not harmful or invasive or involves radiation or mind control, but just involves breathing and paying attention to breathing. So what mindfulness isn't, and this is where I often run into trouble with kids. First of all, the mind does not have to be empty. If I had the power to project the contents of my thoughts while I'm meditating, it's amazing the stuff that comes up. One time I was at a day-long silent retreat, and about 10 o'clock in the morning, my mind was like, okay, you've been silent for a long time and nobody's talking. We're done with this. We're going to bring in the big guns. You should not have treated your boyfriend in university badly. More than 20 years ago. More than 20 years. And I thought, really? That's where we're going to go? But then I couldn't stop thinking about it. This afternoon, when I was doing some seated practice in my car on my way to another meeting, I stopped in the parking lot before I got out of the car, and I took 2 minutes to do some seated practice. And suddenly, the only thing in my head is, you didn't pay the car insurance bill. It's due tomorrow. You need to call them in the morning. But I can't let it go. I can't even notice, okay, yes, pay it tomorrow. It's all good. You don't have to empty your mind. It's really just noticing, agitated about the car payment or the insurance bill or getting groceries or dropping by to see a loved one. You don't have to empty the mind. You just notice it, and then you say, oh, guess what? We're actually focusing on something else. We're working on the breath. You also don't have to control your thoughts. We're not thinking about that now. Stop thinking about that now. No, it's more of a gentle disengagement. We can talk about that later. Right now, mind, we're going to go back to just focusing on the breath and where we feel the breath. Number 3, you don't have to change how you think. Now, I will tell you that if you meditate often enough and with great regularity and for long enough periods of time, you find that all of that anxiety and distress settles down. And you become a better sleeper, and you become a little easier to live with, and you don't blow up nearly as often at your children. You still blow up. I'm convinced if Buddhist monks had children, they would yell. That's my working theory. I can't test it. But you don't have to change the way you think. You might end up changing the way you think, but that's not the goal either. And then last but not least, you don't have to feel calm and relaxed. Lots of novice meditators say, I can't sit down and meditate right now. I'm too agitated. No, that's the best time to sit down and practice. You're agitated? Take 3 deep breaths. I have a note on my desk that says that. And on bad days, I move that note over so it's right there next to the clock. Take 3 deep breaths. Okay, so we're going to do a little more breathing. And I'm going to give you a prompt this time. So I want you to put your hand out like this, or this one, it doesn't matter. Whichever hand you write with, you want to do a pointer finger, and the other hand is out like this. So you have your hand out like this. And we're going to do something I call, it's not just my thing and I didn't make it up, starfish breathing. What you're going to do is as you breathe in, you're going to trace up the side of your thumb. So breathing in, and you're going to stop at the top just for a second. And now you're going to breathe out as you come down the thumb. Breathing in as you go up the thumb, stopping at the top just for a second, and breathing out as you come down the finger. Breathing in, breathing out. Now, you trace your fingers at whatever pace you breathe. Whatever pace you breathe is fine. Just breathing in and breathing out. Breathing in as you go up. And when you get to the end of your hand, come back the other way. Just start at the end of your hand and come back. Breathing in and breathing out. And if you start to think about your car payment, just noticing what you feel on your fingers. You can feel the skin and your fingers might be cold or warm. Just noticing that. And as you get to your thumb again, when you get there, or your pinky finger, just one end of your hand, you're going to put your hand back in your lap and I'll know you're done breathing. So I have been teaching meditation for several years now, and this is a practice I've taught to preschoolers. This is a practice I've taught to lots of school-age kids, and I've taught it to teachers and parents, and then in the spring I got to teach at a conference for older adults on healthy aging. And all seniors from our community, and it was the first time I've ever taught seniors anything other than my mother, who does not like to be referred to as a senior, even though she is a senior. But it was really exciting to be in a room with 200 senior adults who are starfish breathing with me. This is a practice I love because your hands go with you everywhere, unless you have a prosthetic hand, and then we can work on a workaround there. But we take our hands with us anywhere. And if you notice sometime in the community, someone in the grocery store, a little person or a big person tracing their fingers, I saw this a couple months ago. I watched a mom and her preschooler starfish breathe in the candy aisle. There was distress. It's a lovely little practice, and this is another one you might want to try out at home. I'll come back to when you try those practices in just a minute. So now switching over to self-regulation, as somebody who's been working in the field of ADHD for more than 25 years, it's closing in on 30, and I was not a teenage bride. Self-regulation is part and parcel of ADHD, but self-regulation is also part and parcel of what we all do. And this is being in control of ourselves, being able to modulate our behavior, being able to access our thoughts, have some control of our thoughts, if not control our thoughts, at least not act on our thoughts. And we want to manage ourselves in such a way that we end up getting what we want, as opposed to losing something we want. So last night, my 8-year-old was having, basically a temper tantrum, the 8-year-old variety, but he was really mad. He hadn't done his chores. Because he hadn't done his chores, he couldn't have his time on his tablet. Because he couldn't have his time on his tablet, he had decided the world was going to end. This required him to scream and yell. And then he looked at me and he said, "Mommy, you are such a poopy head." So he was in a little bit of control of himself, because you notice he didn't say anything really awful. But those are fighting words in our house, and we do not use those words. We do not call people names. And so I said to him, "I think you need to go sit on the stairs, and I'll be happy to sit with you, but we're not going to talk until you let me know you're ready to be calm." And he said, "Okay." So I said to him later, and that took away his tablet completely. That was just done. Okay, now it doesn't matter if you get your chores done, you still don't get your tablet time. So I said to him later, "How did that work out for you? When you called Mommy a poopy head, how did that work out for you?" He said, "It didn't work out." This is him trying to control himself. I said, "I know. Did you get what you wanted?" "No." "So what do you think maybe would have been a better idea to do?" "Ask for some help with my chores." Yeah, that's self-regulation, is being able to control those impulses, those drive states, so you end up getting what you want. I like Kelly McGonigal's statement about self-regulation, that it's the ability to do what you really want to do when part of you really doesn't want to do it. And we've all had this experience. Nobody wants to do the ironing, or the folding the rags, or the unloading the dishwasher. Pick your noxious task. You don't want to do that, but you do it, even when you don't want to do it, because it makes it easier to do the next thing, whatever's coming next. So self-regulation is about controlling impulses. Now, developmentally, we come into the world, and all of you know this, we come into the world with almost no ability to self-regulate. We come into the world where we basically do the stuff we want. So someone takes your toy, you know what you do. You hit them until you can take it back from them, or you bite them until they drop it, or you scream until they're so frightened that they drop it, or your mom comes and solves the problem for you. But, first couple years of your life, 3 years of your life, you really don't have any good self-regulation. My very first doctoral student has just had her second baby. She's graduated, she's working in the Toronto area, but she's just had her second baby, which makes me delighted, and at the same time, I feel so old. So she's just had her second baby, and she sends me this email this morning, and she said, I'm so sorry, I've been out of touch, I'm so overwhelmed. And her 2-year-old is having a hard time with the change because there's something else in her house, and that baby thing takes away mommy and daddy's attention, and it's making it harder for her to get what she wants, and she wants mommy all the time, and pretty much she's throwing herself down on the floor and kicking and screaming a couple times a day when she doesn't get exactly what she wants. And my student said to me, what am I going to do? Just help me know what to do, because I feel completely inadequate. This is somebody with a PH.D. in clinical neuropsychology. She's had loads of practice with kids, but she feels overwhelmed. And we all feel overwhelmed sometimes by kids. And my first thing to say to her was, first of all, you've got this. You've totally got this. It's going to be fine. Part of the problem is you are immediately postpartum. Be gentle. Second of all, she has no control over this. So when she's screaming, as long as she's safe, walk away, just like you're doing great. She won't hurt herself. Make sure she's safe, and then walk away. So by the end of our kind of age 3, age 4, we start to come online with a little bit of self-regulation. To the point that with 3 and 4-year-olds, we can go back to Walter Mischel's work. And you probably know about the marshmallow task. Do you know about the marshmallow task? So we put a marshmallow in front of a preschooler, and we say, don't eat that marshmallow. If the marshmallow is still on the table when I come back to this room in 1 minute, you get 2 marshmallows. And you can watch. Some preschoolers, before you even get the explanation out there, they have snatched the marshmallow and it is in there and they are chewing it up and it is gone. Where's the next one? Some preschoolers sit on their hands, and we can watch them in an observation room for this task. That's the best part. They sit on their hands and they look at it. Some preschoolers turn themselves around. Like, if I don't look at it, it's not so tempting. Some preschoolers are cool as a cucumber. They fold their arms and they look at it. Like, I got this. I am ready for that second marshmallow. You go on out. You can stay gone for 10 minutes. You come back. It'll still be there because I'm going to get 2 marshmallows. Unfortunately, there's wide variation in what different people do with self-regulation. Some of us come into the world ready to self-regulate. Some of us come into the world and, gosh, it's going to be hard all the way along. The either good or bad news is, though, our brains are not fully mature until we are about 25 years old. So when I teach undergraduates at the university, I say to them, I would really focus on the fact that I know you're not entirely grown up yet. You're going to screw this up. That's okay. Just take ownership and we'll move on. The brain is not fully mature until you're about 25 years old. And the part of the brain that is last to mature is that stuff right behind the forehead. That prefrontal cortex does not have all of its insulation in there, and it's a big mess. And for some of us, it might be 26 or 27, but mid-20s is about the time that your brain is as developed as it's going to be. The bad news is it's all downhill from there. So, we develop some more impulse problems the older we get. There's very interesting work going on in New York City with a sample of adults that are now in their 50s and 60s. They're following a group that have ADHD and a group that don't have ADHD, and they've followed them since they were children. It's a big longitudinal study. And the thing that is really interesting is about 10 years ago, so these individuals were in their mid-40s through their mid-50s, started reporting attention problems. That had adults who had never had attention problems, people who never had ADHD, are suddenly having big attention and concentration problems. I think that's the brain sliding just a little bit. So we need to come up with ways to prop up our brains in our 40s and 50s and 60s and beyond. We prop up little brains, and now we're going to prop up older brains too. So there's this wide variation. Some of us are pretty self-controlled as adults. Some of us are self-controlled in some areas and not so controlled in others. So if there's a jar of candy on my desk, it's only there for a little while. Then it's an empty jar. But when it comes to shopping, I love to shop. I have a great time shopping, but I could go to the mall and not buy anything. I can go online, not buy anything. If I buy something and get it home, I think, I don't really like it. I take it back, no big deal. Someone like my husband, he has awesome self-control. You can leave candy all the way around the counter in jars. Doesn't touch it. He loves candy. He's like, I don't need it. Not good for me. Teeth problems, blood sugar problems, don't want to get fat. He's good. Set him loose with an iTunes card, it's gone. My parents and I each gave him fairly large iTunes cards in his Christmas stocking. Yeah, that money's long since spent. He has all kinds of new albums. He's the guy who has the equivalent of 1,500 albums in the cloud. He's always listening to something new. So we have wide variability, and it's fairly situation specific, but some of us are more self-regulated and some of us are less self-regulated. In terms of the factors that predict self-regulation, a big one is family and culture, what we think about self-control. So something my mother and I have been doing the last couple of years is we've been traveling together. And it's fun to do this. We've now had 2 trips together. We haven't traveled together since I was in high school, and it was punishment then. It's actually a lot of fun now. And one of the things we enjoy doing is observing how people interact differently in different places in the world. So we were in Sweden this past spring, and while we were there, we spent a lot of time noticing that 8 and 10-year-old boys are much better behaved than mine are. There's a lot of self-regulation expected of them very early on, and they walk in line and they're quite quiet in museums. Mine are jumping around. They're okay in a line when it comes to school, but stay with me as we're somewhere, it's not good. Part of that is culture. We are not people in our family or in this community or in North America that say, always do the right thing. Always be quiet, always take up as little space as possible. But families also are different in what they expect, and some families have a lot of rules. So my mother grew up in a family where children were not allowed to speak unless spoken to when there were other adults around. Like my grandparents are having a cocktail party, and everybody, it was the 50s, so 50s and 60s, everybody's in pretty clothes, and my mother might be invited at age 12 to come in and pass hors d'oeuvres, but she was expected to be silent unless somebody said, "Oh, Lynn, it looks like you're wearing a new dress. Is it a new dress?" And she'd say, "Yes, my mother just made it for me. I like my new dress. How are you this evening?" And the lady or gentleman would say, "Fine, thank you." And she'd say, "I'm glad to hear it." And she would move on. My children would engage in a long dialogue about the tablet because that's what they love. So family and culture makes a difference. Temperament also makes a difference. So some of us come into the world a little more behaviorally inhibited. We are a little more self-controlled. We're a little more aware of punishment. We're a little more aware of awards and rewards. And so we kind of manage ourselves better. Some of us come into the world and we're going to put our hand in the cookie jar every single time, depending on what the cookie jar holds. Genetics also plays a role, and you've probably seen this. If you spend much time with my father, you'll discover he's a pretty impulsive guy. And if you spend much time with my brother, you'll find out he's pretty impulsive too. And my grandmother is now deceased, but if you knew my grandma, my dad's mom, you'd find out she was pretty impulsive. I didn't know my great-grandparents on that side. I'm guessing someone was impulsive. It tends to fall in line. So self-regulation is certainly heritable. And then last but not least, our brains are different because of the way we treat them, because of the way we interact with the world. And so there are brain-based differences. There are neuroanatomy differences, but there are also neurochemical and neurofunctioning differences. And those are hard to quantify, but the brain is changeable. So if I was giving this talk in 1998 or even 2000, I'd say you have all the brain cells you're ever going to have when you're born. Turns out that's not true. You continue to pop out some new neurons in some specific structures your whole life. So there are brain differences too. So mindfulness and self-regulation. How do we put these two things together? Well, there are loads and loads of studies, and I didn't give you the references because it would have taken up the whole slide, but there are loads and loads of studies to show that kids who get mindfulness training are a little bit better at self-regulation. They're a little bit better at controlling their impulses. They're a little bit better at managing distress. They're a little bit better at dealing with stressors, bumps in the road. Perfect? No. Better? Yes. But there's some caveats to that, and these caveats are really important. First of all, the child or adolescent has to be actively engaged. If they are sitting quiet and they're saying to their mom, I'll do this, but you can't make me do it, right? Or they're even thinking that, it's not going to make any difference. The child has to see some benefit. The adolescent has to see some benefit. And kids are really good with authenticity, and more importantly, in authenticity. So you say, you're going to learn to meditate. And they think, and when are you going to learn to meditate? Now, I will admit, my kids don't have that response. But my 10-year-old will say to me, I need to calm down, but so do you. Have you taken a deep breath? Cheeky, yes. Borderline disrespectful, yes. Accurate, yes. Crosshairs. 10-year-olds and younger and older are really good with inauthenticity. So we want to make sure if we are bringing mindfulness practice to our home environment, our classroom environment, we are practicing too. We are practicing every day. And that's one of the big gold standard rules, is you practice every day for maybe a year before you teach others. Now that's formal practice. I think you can sit and breathe with your kids anytime. But I think you can count on something like I get from my 8-year-old over the last year. He was really good prior to this, and he will be good again in the future. But right now we're going through the, I am not breathing with you. I will hold my breath. And he can, until he goes, as he realizes he's run entirely out of oxygen. We want to let kids push back a little bit. And we want to sit and give them the opportunity to take a deep breath. Why don't we take a deep breath? Or you're having an argument with your romantic partner. You know, like, no, it's your turn to pick him up. No, it's your turn to pick him up. No, it's your turn to pick him up. Why didn't you get the carrots? It was on the list. You didn't tell me about the list. I didn't know there was a list. I asked you to do it. No, you didn't. I sent you a text. My battery's dead. These are the arguments we had in our house in the past 48 hours. Carrots, and whose turn is it to pick up the dog from the groomer. So it's really important in those moments, perhaps, to model this kind of behavior. And that's one of the things we want to think about, is how do we model mindfulness practice for our kids, so that taking a time out, taking a deep breath, stomping around the house saying, it already is, it already is, it already is, it already is. Saying, in my case, I say to my kids, I'm off to teach tonight. Now tonight, my children said to me, Mommy, you're not dressed to teach meditation. You're dressed for something grown up. Apparently, I only teach mindfulness in yoga pants. So just know you got the one off. I'm not in yoga pants tonight to teach meditation. So there are 5 important practices that we need to teach with mindfulness. And these aren't practices like sit down and do this, but these are the big constructs. So the first one is acknowledging that we have to keep turning the attention back to whatever we're focusing on, the breath, where we feel the breath, the body, over and over again, and intentionally just moving the attention back. Focusing on the present moment, not what's going on yesterday or tomorrow or in 10 minutes or in the next room, just focusing right now, right here, where we are. Focusing also on acceptance. So whatever you find in there, it's okay. You can discover you're actually mad, or you're jealous, or you're angry, or you're sad, or you're really peaceful, or you're just plain tired, fed up maybe. It's okay. Whatever you find in there, that's okay. Observing any distress you find. Fairly often I will sit down to meditate, and within a couple minutes I recognize something happened yesterday or the day before. It wasn't any big deal, but it actually did bother me. And now I'm going to spend some time just noticing, okay, where is that distress? Is that in my neck? Does that hurt in my neck? Does it hurt in my jaw? Is it in the middle of my back? Am I thinking about it? Am I thinking about it a lot? Just watching it, but not continuing to think about it, just watching it. And then last but not least, the practice must be regular. It must be something we do all the time. We do not every minute, but every day. So if you see my to-do list for any given day, I have a pad of paper and it has the days of the week, and I have a to-do list, and across the top of every single day is meditate. And right now I'm engaging in a little bit of self-experimentation, so I'm trying out what happens if I meditate for 10 minutes every single day, no matter what, and then a longer practice anytime I can push in a longer practice. So, I would say 3, 4, 5 days a week, I get another 40 or 50 minute sit. But I'm trying out this 10-minute sit, and it's always in my office at my desk. Because I want to see, does this work? Does this kind of practice work? Or do I really need to be on my cushion? Or do I really need to sit for longer? I don't know. We're going to see. So far, I think it's working, but I follow how my sleep is, because my sleep is my indicator of how stressed out I am. When I'm sleeping well every night, I'm doing better. And when I'm waking up over and over again, I'm not doing better. So we'll see. So mindfulness practices need to be regular to be meaningful as well. So rules of thumb. Let's say you think, okay, I'm going to try this breathing thing. We're going to do breathing. I'm going to do my own breathing, and I'm going to breathe with my child, or I'm going to breathe with my class. So first of all, the first rule is practice first, then teach. And there are lots of good apps out there. I'm not a fan of Headspace, but that doesn't mean it's not a good program. I'm not a fan of Headspace. I like Stop, Breathe, and Think. And I like Smiling Mind. Now, I like Smiling Mind because it was developed in Australia. They have a great accent. Sometimes you do what you got to do. Stop, Breathe, and Think is, they're both free. They don't cost you anything. You download them, you put them on your smartphone, on your tablet, on your laptop, and you can have your 2 apps that you go back and forth between. Or you can engage in just sitting in silence, but that's hard if you haven't done this before. I'd use some guided meditation. And you can pick the length of your meditation. Do you have 2 minutes? Do you have 7 minutes? Do you have 10 minutes? Do you have 30 minutes? Pick your practice. Next, if you decide to share this with a child, pay attention to the child's age. If they are 3 years old, the very longest they can possibly sit is 3 minutes. Age in years, maximum minutes. And you don't start with the maximum. When I'm starting with kids of any age, we start with 3 big breaths. And where do you feel the breath? Do you feel it in your nose? Do you feel it on the top of your lip? Do you feel it in your neck, your collarbones, your rib cage, your belly, or your back? Because everybody feels their breath differently. So you start with 3 big breaths, and then you move up from there. It's also important to remember that kids do better when practices involve props or movement. So tracing the fingertips would be a good movement-based practice that's easy, that you can do just about anywhere. Kids also do better with guidance, and if you go to Smiling Mind, there's a whole section of kid apps. Little kid apps, medium kid apps, big kid apps, or practices. And then always going back to taking a big breath, and where did you notice it? And this is a practice, it sounds so easy. You think, really, that's all it is? That's all it is. Taking a big breath, and where did you notice it? Because that is you reactivating your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of your brain that acts like a parachute. It's the rescue. It's the rest and restore part of your brain. You know about fight or flight? That's the sympathetic nervous system. That's you agitated. I got to get away. I got to fight something. I got to kill something. I got to hide from something. Something's terrible. Something's awful. You take a big, deep breath. Where did you notice it? Okay, I'm still stressed out. Okay, let's do this again. Take another deep breath. And where did I notice it? And then we do it one more time. You've actually activated your parasympathetic nervous system. Now you're a little bit more settled, and you can do this. So each time, big breath, where did you notice it? You'll feel better. Okay, so one last practice. You're going to put your hand out again. See, you got your prop. It's easy when you have a prop. And what you're going to do is you're just going to tap your fingers, and you're going to tap your fingers slowly. So as you tap your thumb, or you can start over here, it doesn't matter, but you tap your finger and you breathe in. You tap your next finger and you breathe out. And come back the other way. Isn't that easy? And the reason we do that practice that way is now we're focused on our fingertips. Tapping, 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 tapping. Another practice you can use. One other thing I should say about teaching kids: don't start when they're upset or agitated. The first time you take a deep breath with a child, do that when everything is calm. The best time to do it is the sneakiest time. They're in bed, assuming your kids go to bed quietly and easily. I have good sleepers now, so I'm really lucky. But they're in bed and they're quiet, and I'll say, do you want to take a deep breath with mommy? Yeah. So we take a deep breath and we let it go. And I say, was it in your nose tonight? Nope. It was in my belly. So if lying in the dark is a quiet time, not all kids are quiet at that time, I know it. If there's another time of day that's quiet, that's when you do take a deep breath the first time. And you build up practice in those quiet moments, in those calm moments, in those happy moments. And then you can sneak it in at a time that they're mad. Just a little bit mad. It's not like you took away their tablet. It's something small, like, you know, we're going to go to the movies. We're not going for another 3 minutes. Mom! Take a deep breath. All right. Thank you so much for your patience and your attention this evening. And I thank you for this evening. It's an honor to work with you.